following question, which I think I'll address first to Spencer. And the question is, what do you see as the biggest areas of opportunities and threats under the new Act? Spencer, how do you feel answering that one?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. So from an opportunity perspective, I think that there's a number of opportunities here, and it depends on the organisation going in. But the first thing I would suggest is that if your procurement function has been struggling to get sort of resources or traction within your organisation to do things in a sort of end-to-end way and a transparent way in accordance with the sort of the national procurement statement, but also obviously the sort of, if you're a SIPS person, the SIPS code of conduct, then this new legislation offers you an opportunity to be able to go back to your leadership team, your organisation, to maybe get some support and resources to do things, I'm going to say properly, that sounds a bit judgmental, but in accordance with sort of better commercial practice. So for me, as an opportunity from a public sector practitioner's point of view, this is an opportunity for you to be able to convince those people around you to get more involved and also to get more resources to do it well. From a threats perspective, obviously the reverse of that is that this is procurement with the lights on, as far as I'm concerned now. And there's going to be a lot more transparency. There's going to be a lot more requirement for notices. And if they do what they say they're going to do, there's going to be a lot more people watching to ensure that you're doing things properly. So there'll be a procurement review unit. That's not new. It's a procurement review service right now, but they reckon they're going to be more vigilant. They're going to have more powers. So the threats really are, there's more people watching and you're going to be doing it more transparently. So if you're doing it, if anything goes wrong, that sounds a bit sort of, worrying, but if anything goes wrong, it's going to go wrong a little bit more publicly. So definitely from an opportunities perspective, here's a chance to do it really, really well, even better than you're doing it now. From a threats perspective, if you're worried about it, you've not got the resources or things potentially could go wrong, it's going to be done a bit more in the light. So
Thank you, Spencer. I know that when we did discuss these questions before meeting for the webinar, and I remember you did mention something saying that in order to look at what the opportunities and threats are, perhaps people need to see where they are along the developmental road to their maturity model. Do you feel like saying a little more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, and it's something I've said quite a lot recently in various sort of podcasts and conversations. Depending on where you are now, depends on how easy it's going to be to implement this new act. If you're already a performing procurement organisation, everyone's working well together, you already understood that it was, a three-phase approach from pre-procurement through to contract management, and your suppliers love you and everything's going great, then this is going to be easy peasy lemon squeezy and you're going to have a great time on the October the 28th. If, however, things are not that perfect, and that's probably 99% of us, then you want to know where you are right now in terms of what's already in place, what's working well, are the basics in place in terms of the things you're going to have for October the 28th, the contracts register, a forward procurement plan, etc. So to do a temperature check on your organization now, whilst you've got the time to do it, and work out how close are you to what you need to be able to do at the end of October, is a really, really essential thing for you to do. You don't necessarily have to get one of us externals in to do it for you. You could do it yourself, but obviously there's lots of people out there who have models like this to come and help you. But you definitely take a long, hard look at yourself so you're quite aware on October the 28th how well sort of prepared is your boat for this journey, because it's coming.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that one, Spencer. And Richard Howroyd, I was wondering, did you have any other thoughts on opportunities in addition to what Spencer's said about opportunities and threats on this question?
Yes, I thought that was a really good brief overview from Spencer there. I'd really agree with everything that's being said. If you coming from, say, a local authority background, I would certainly be looking at the LGA's procurement maturity model. That becomes the standard benchmarking for how a procurement service should be working within local government. Lots of the transparency requirements for local government, you're already probably meeting anyway because of the specific local authority transparency requirements. I see that, though, the biggest threat in particular within local government is the cultures around contract management. And you really are going to have to do a lot of education within your organization. And I would assume that this will be the same in lots of other public sector organizations, to really make it clear what contract management responsibilities actually are. In particular, when we start talking about things like monitoring KPIs, modifications of contracts going forward, there is an eye on you going forward. You're going to have to publish more notices. You are going to have to consider doing standstill periods when you do modifications. So if you don't get your people trained, you're going to really struggle. And again, I think some of the requirements for additional notices at below threshold will be quite a challenge in some organisations.
Mm. Thank you, Richard. We've just had a live question from somebody saying, and I think you've touched on this, but perhaps you'd go a bit further. They say, I work in a private sector, in the private sector as procurement manager. Will this impact my organisation, or is this more public procurement? So I think between Richard and Jenny, you may have something to add to this. But first, Richard.
If you're in the private sector, I think you're very lucky. You don't have to comply with some of the this legislation. It's very much public sector transparency driven. So again, if you look at some of the drivers around the legislation, you can go back to, for example, some of the scandals around PPE during COVID, and also some of the contract management failures that have gone on in public sector in recent years. The only area you might need to consider it, and I don't know what area of the private sector you are. If you are running frameworks and procurements on behalf of the public sector, you will have to be aware of it and ensure you comply when working with a contracting authority.
Excellent. I hope that met our questioner's needs for that. At the same time, Jenny, you have a huge amount of experience from the private sector.
Absolutely, and I absolutely agree with what Richard said. It really does depend if the organisation that you're working for is delivering into the public sector anyway. But really, private sector does tend to follow public sector as best practice anyway, really. So again, not as regulated as the public sector, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So day-to-day business, yes, most of the real detail stuff for the public sector, not a massive impact is what we're saying on the private sector, but of course you do need to understand that you will be working under certain constraints and additional transparency requirements, as we've heard. So question from Sean Horton was explaining how it will affect day-to-day business then. So have we pretty well bottomed that one out, do we think? Explaining how it will affect day-to-day business. Richard, do you feel we've answered that question? This one from Sean Horton.
I think the reality is most public sector organisations will continue to work in a very similar manner to how they have worked in the past. In terms of working with public sector, you're going to have to learn some new language. There's quite a bit of different terminology. Some of the notices, names have changed. I know from delivering the deep dives, there is certainly some controversy at the moment around the termination notice, because people have never thought that they need to issue a notice when they end a contract. And the term termination makes people think you've terminated because of poor performance. No, this is just a trigger to say that the contract has come to an end. So yeah, maybe the language isn't perfect, but from that point of view, it will create a transparent